since we're able to successfully retrieve our data points from the front end to the back end, such as name, email, and password, now let's look into creating a Mongoose model in order to store our data and in order to store the Mongoose model as an instance to the storage, which we'll be working with later on. So first, in the root of the project, create a models folder, and in the model folder, create a user.js in order to create our user model. First, let's go about grabbing Mongoose, since that's how we'll be creating our schema. Const schema equals mongoose.schema, const user schema equals new schema. So in here we'll basically creating properties such as name, email, and password. So in this case, name would be a string. In here, basically what we're doing is creating a property name and assigning a type. In this case, we'll be assigning a type of string, since we always know that a name should be a string. Email is also a string, email is also a string, yeah. And lastly, we'll have a password, which will also be a string. And here we basically do user equals mongoose.model user schema. Basically setting up a collection where this would be going to. The user collection is where all the user schemas will be located whenever we save the new instance of a user schema. So what we could do here now is we could export the user schema, or user model. In the server, we will const user equals model, user model. Before we go about populating our user, let's also install bcrypt in order to hash our password before we store it in npm install -save bcrypt. Successfully installing bcrypt, let's go to bcrypt's documentations on npm to see what we should be using to storing our password correctly. So in here, something that I use often is bcrypt.hashsync. Then in here, as a first argument, we store our text password, and the second parameter we include the salt generation number. So higher the number from 1 to 10, harder it is to brute force. By default, I tend to put 10 just because higher the salt generation rounds, harder it is for hackers to brute force the password. So in our sign up route, let's create a new instance of new user. So here, as we can see in the user's model, you have a name, email, and password. And before I forget, I will include a unique property so that we only have one user per email, and a type of string. And we go back. Email should come from rec.body.email, and name comes from rec.body.name, as we could see from our routes. Ooh. Well, we can't see it yet, but I'll kind of show you guys again now. Body.email, just for example. If you click on it, as we could see, self-coding at gmail.com. And lastly, password. rec.body.password. But we would also need to wrap it around the bcrypt hash sync and salt generation of 10. So this is how we'll be going about kind of storing our password. And if we go here and see the user variable afterwards, we should be able to see the result. Ooh, we got an error. bcrypt is not defined. Oh, because we didn't include the bcrypt. Let's bcrypt. Those require bcrypt. Let's do that and resubmit. This bcrypt is still not defined. Oh, I spelled it wrong. That's my bad. Let's do once more. Sorry about that, guys. As you can see, we are by default given an ID of the user. Email is stored, name is stored, and password, as you can see, is hashed now. And later I'll show you guys how to unhash it in order to compare the password to see the user who logged in has the correct credentials or not. But before that, we will need to save this. But before we save the user, we will need to know where we save. So let's go to mlabs, which is one of the tools that I use in order to create sandbox storages. Here we go to the right, create new. Let's call it. Let's click on sandbox. Let's go right, continue. Any region is fine. Here I use US East. I'm gonna call it sandbox. If you guys haven't used mlab, you guys could use any other storage, MongoDB storage you guys prefer using, but I prefer using mlab for sandbox reasons. So this is what I'm using. If you guys don't have any other sandbox or any other storages to use, I would suggest you guys use mlab because it's free and you guys are able to test out many different storages. As you can see, I have many different created here. So here, first, before we do anything, we will need to create a user collection in order to basically log in order to provide credentials for us to connect to the MongoDB database. The mlab database. Here, we'll just call it admin, or it says 6 characters long. Let's do admin123, admin123. You guys should basically cover this if you guys can later. I'm just using a default password basically in order to show you guys how this would work. Here we grab this link and we connect to we connect to mlab by doing mongoose.connect. Then we provide the URL, and in this part, db user will do admin, and in the db password we do admin123 since that's what I mentioned earlier as the user collection. So if we do that, we're now connected to the DB database, as we can see by this text. And now we are able to save the new user by doing new user.save. And if there's any error, I'll do a quick callback. Error, return res.status. Since it is a client error, status of 400.json. Title error. So this would most likely be called when there's already a user created with the pre-existing email. So error email in use. From what I've come across, there's usually no other cases when this error would be called unless there is a user with the same email. And otherwise, if we don't have an error, then return res.status 200, which means success. JSON title sign up success. And we don't really need to send back any data, so we'll just send back the title. And in the front end, let's test it out. Let's refresh. Self-coding, email self-coding at gmail.com. And 123 as a password since this doesn't matter. Oh, well, we don't get any sent back just because we haven't did create a then statement to basically grab any response. So we'll do that now. Then console.log. So we missed. So I clicked it twice. So initially it was success, and basically second we got a 400 bad request. So let's see. We'll also do an error. We'll also add in the error since that's how we'll grab the error, the response. So self-coding, well this is self since we already use self-coding at Gmail as a password or as the email. And password doesn't matter at this point. So as we can see, it says we get a data status 200 as a response. And data, since we only included the title in the backend to send to the front end, it says sign of success. But in the second case, if we were to click it again, we get an error. We get a 400 bad request response status. And if we go to the data and data error, since that's how we sent back the error object as, it says error of email in use, since email is already in use by us already signing up previously in this case. Entitled error. Now after successfully saving the Mongo model, our Mongoose model, let's go check the mlab and see the result. As we could see, I already have it open, but if you were to go here, go to collections, and we should have collections named users. And here we should have two collections since we did create two different emails. We did try 4 different times, but both 2 of those times we got an error because it was duplicated emails. So as you can see, it says email self@gmail.com and email self-coding@gmail.com. And as we can see, there's only 2 collections. Afterwards, what we could do is log in. In order to get that going, let's go to the front end. And we will install Vue Router just to make it easier to show the front end sign up page and a login page. Installing Vue Router, let's implement that or integrate that into our main.js page. Here we'll import Vue Router from Vue Router, and to create an instance of router, we do const routes for a list of routes, and let's do path of slash component that we will later create called landing, and we'll also create that landing component in components slash landing. We'll create a path called sign up and include the component sign up here. And also include path called login, so that when we go slash localhost 8080/login, we get a component login page, which later we'll be implementing. Component login. So in here we'll also just copy this twice and change this to sign up. Sign up. Login. And to create the new, here it says components landing, because we haven't created a landing component yet. We'll take so right now, the view template, script name. To create the router, we go by creating like this, const router, goes new router, and we basically include the router right here. And in here we do mode equals history, and routes equals routes. We could just leave it as just routes since this is the name of the same variable in the router property named routes. So just leave it like this and it'll still be included. So let's test this. If you go here, and if you go to, well, actually we'll also need to go to the app view, and instead of doing sign up, you will just get rid of this and do router.view, which is how we render router views. Here it says router view. Make sure to provide name and the options. Let's actually go to the Vue router documentations, where you can find right here. If you go type that in Google, the first one comes up. In here, you're able to find that what I didn't include in my main.js is the statement Vue.use Vue router, which is the most important part. This is a must, and as we can see, the error went away. And here, as we can see, if it's just slashed, it shows landing page. If we do sign up, let's take a look. Sign up page is not loading for some reason. Oh, it's 80. Oh, it's 80. Sign up page. This is what we get, and we could do login as well. But there's no template in there, so it gives an error. So template, script name, login. Let's just do a quick login. Input, type text is fine. Input, type password would be good. V model, password, and V model. Yeah. If we do that, we get two column text, which we could separate by doing that, and we could say email, password. We could also have another break tag in order to have a button for login. So let's refresh it. It says password is not defined, so we would also have to define the password. Return email is empty, password is also empty. So since we do have a simple login page, let's kind of let's actually include the workflow for sending the email and the password to the backend. So first we will need to import Axios from Axios. After doing from Axios, here we could have a function whenever the login is clicked. Login. Have a methods object and have the login function. And here what we do here is it should be axios.post/http, since we will later create a backend route called login, and where we'll have a user credential. We'll first create a user credential before we send this to the backend. The email will be this, the email, and password is just the password. And also it's the backend. Later we'll send a response, and based on the response later, if it's successful or not, we'll basically provide them to redirect their route into the landing page. And those who are only later authorized to get to the landing page will be provided that option. And if the user is not authorized and tries to get to the landing page, they'll be redirected into either sign up or a login page. So here, now let's go to the backend and let's get this ready. The server.js file, we will now include another app.post route that directs to a login. Let's go ahead and do that. Login, res next. If we console log rec.body, we will be able to see what actually sends get back to the backend. So if we do that, self-coding@gmail.com 123. As we can see here, it says email, self-coding Gmail, and password 123. So we know that password is saved in the backend in the MongoDB database, which is located in mlab as a bcrypt.hash, or a hashed value of the plain text. If we go to the bcrypt npm, we're able to see how we're able to compare our passwords in order to grab if it's correct, in order to add a conditional to keep them into the user workflow, into the authentication workflow. So first, before we even do that, we'll have to find an email that is corresponding with the inputted email, so if it's self-coding. And the way we go about doing that is we do user.find1. Since we know that emails are unique, we should just be able to grab a single email. Red.body the email, and we know that it's located in the email, and we can say user. So it will cause an error if there are any errors that are caused between this process, and if the user is not found with the corresponding email that is sent by in the front end, which is through red.body the email, the user will have a value of null. So let's go ahead and first error check if there's any error. Return as a status. It'll be a 500 to be internal error. JSON title server error, and error would be the error object that we will be receiving through this. So if user is not found, if user is null, that means there's no corresponding email that is that locates the user. We'll do return as a JSON as a status 400, and once it's unauthorized, and JSON title user not found, error, invalid credentials, since we don't want to provide too much of information regarding if it's the wrong password, if it's the wrong email or whatnot. Since after checking if user is not null, we know that there is a user with a corresponding email, we will now check if the password is incorrect. In order to do that, we go about using bcrypt again. Bcrypt compare sync, since we are comparing synchronously, and we'll put in the first parameter of the data rec.body.password, and the second would be the hashed password, which is located in the user.password. User.password, and if it returns true, that means the password is correct, and since we are checking to see if password is incorrect, we'll be using the exclamation mark in the front to see if it's false. And if that is the case, and if passwords are incorrect, we'll send another status for one response. JSON title login field and error invalid credentials. And lastly, if all is good. So in this case, that means all the conditionals were passed and the password password is correct. And now we'll be using what is known called JSON-WebToken in order to authorize the user and send a token back to the front end in order for the user to use that token to grab data about himself and things about the collection that he is in control of. How about installing JSON-WebToken? Let's go and install JSON-WebToken. And while this is installing, one thing we could do in the signup page is, because we know that in the server.js we send a status of 200 when the signup is successful, and status of 400 and the error message when it is an error. So we could do this. We could have that error text, and we could just below the button have a little template text called error to bind it with this. And if we do have an error response, we would go about setting it this error. Well, let's first check to see in the signup page what errors we get as a response. So coding, self-coding. Since we know that this email is already in use, it should return an error. And we do see that it returns a status of 400. So if we were to go about error, that response, that data, that error, we should be able to grab the text. So error, that response, that data, that error, and we set this dot error equals to that. And let's try once more. Let's go self-coding at gmail.com. We can see it says email in use. And if it is successful, let's do some email that we haven't tried. Let's find self-coding lab at gmail.com. We will set it equal this error message equal to nothing in order to clear out the error variable. And after doing that, we should be able to push this user into the sign up or login page, since we know that this user has signed up successfully. So let's do that. So see self-codinglab@gmail.com. See, we are now moved into the login page because we now signed up successfully, because we know that the email that we created was a unique one. So if we go to the mlab again, it should have a new email that I created right here.